Hi, my name is Samantha. Thanks for joining me today. Today's video is a very detailed instruction on how to make placemats, napkins, and coasters for your table. This video will be broken up into two parts. Alright, to make this dining set, we are going to have two different fabrics. We have the bunny fabric and the blue flowers. So here is an example of two pattern placemats, coasters, and napkins. So what I'm going to do is use these as a template to see just how much fabric we're going to have left over. So I already have the 2 yards of blue laid out. Now I'm going to lay out my bunny fabric. And this fabric's already been pre-washed, so the colors aren't going to spread and it's not going to shrink because I've already washed and dried it. Alright, so a placemat will take up this much space, so I want to make 6 placemats, 6 coasters, and 6 napkins. So a placemat takes up this much space, so that'd be 2, sorry. So I'm going to use 1 piece here for the front and 1 piece here for the back. So that means that each time I lay it down, it'll be 2. So this is 2, 4, 6. So this amount of fabric is going to be for the 6 placemats. Then we have our napkins. What's nice about the napkin, so the placemats are 14 inches tall and 20 inches wide because most of the fabrics are 20 to 22 inches when folded, so they're 40. So that allows you to use 1 piece for the placemats, and then the napkins I like to do 14 inches rather than 15 because sometimes you don't get a full 5 inches on the opposite side, like maybe it shrunk in one spot. So if you do 14-inch napkins, it allows for enough space to have 5-inch coasters without a doubt. So I'll be able to get 8 napkins, so 2 out of this because it's only 1 panel when you do a napkin, so it'll be 8, so it'll be 2, 2, 2, and 2, and then same thing with the coasters. So for every napkin on 1 piece, you get 1 napkin, 1 coaster, because the coaster needs a front and a back. So for each folded piece of fabric, you get 2 napkins, 2 coasters. So if you only wanted to make a smaller place setting that would only have 2 placemats, 2 napkins, 2 coasters, you would only need about 42 inches of fabric. And at the fabric store, you can ask per inch. You don't have to get a half yard or a whole yard. You can say, I want 12 inches. So if you wanted to make a smaller place setting, so a smaller amount of place settings, I would just get 42 inches. If you want to get it on the safe side, you could get 45. All right, so now that I know that I have enough fabric, we also need interfacing. So I already have my interfacing pre-cut here for my placemats. So again, it's It's 14 inches tall by 20 inches. So now I'm going to want to go ahead and cut my fabric pieces. So I'll need 12 14 by 20 inch pieces because I will want 6 for the top, 6 for the bottom. And then cut 14 by 14s for the napkins and then 5 by 5s for the coasters. And the coasters also need interfacing. What I do for the coasters is I already have some 5 by 5 inch pieces ready to go. And I can explain this container in another video if you're interested. All right, so let's go to the cutting mat and get all of our pieces cut up and ready to go. All right, so now we're at our cutting table. I've got my 2 fabrics, my rotary blade, and my straight edge. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make each piece 14 inches, which is the nice part about making the napkins the same size as the placemats, is I can just go down the line of this fabric and just cut 14-inch strips. And then once I'm done, I can just go and cut them to 20 inches and cut them to 14 by 14 with the 5-inch coasters, but they're all the same height. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my creased edge up to a straight line, and I'm gonna give myself a right angle. So I'm gonna line this up. I'm not worried about the measurement right now. I'm just worried about getting a right angle on my first cut. So I'm gonna try and cut off the least amount possible. So it looks like 17 here. I have a big gap here and I have a little gap here. So I'm gonna go ahead and slice this guy off, and that's gonna give me a straight right angle. Let me zoom you out a little so you can see it better. All right, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna cut this guy off. All right, I'm gonna toss that. All right, and then because I'm right-handed, I need to flip this fabric back around, and I can start making my 14-inch cuts now. So you could fold this in half again and then cut 4 layers at a time, or I could put the bunny fabric on top of it, but I don't want to, I'm not in that much of a rush and I don't want to mess up, so I'd rather just take it slow and steady. So right now I'm just lining up the 2 right angles. I'm gonna put this guy down. This is nice because this has this lip here, so I'm putting it on the edge of my cutting mat and it's kind of locking into place. So I'm getting it matched up with my 14 here, my 14 up there, and I know it's a straight cut. The only thing is my Alex table is shorter than what my mat is right here. So this part right here, I have to cut a little harder because it's actually dangling. About like 1 inch is dangling off. All right, so now I have a 14 by 21-inch piece. So when I cut this off to be 20 inches, there'll just be a little bit cut off, but we already have to cut this side off anyways, so that's getting the maximum amount of use out of this piece of fabric. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut all of the blue and all of the bunnies into 14-inch by selvage end pieces, and then I'll get back to you. All right, so now I have my 14-inch pieces, and this is why I always suggest getting a little more than what you need for a project. So out of the blue roses, or blue flowers, I was able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 14-inch strips, but out of the bunnies, I was only able to get 4, and I got 2 yards of each of them, both at Joann's. different fabrics act different ways when they've been washed or when they've been cut, or sometimes when they're cut at the store, maybe it's cut off at an angle. All of these factors have to do with sometimes you don't get exactly the same amount, but that's totally fine. So I wanted to use some of these fabrics for another project anyways. So I'm going to set my 13-inch piece and my 14-inch piece from this one aside for another project. And then for these placemats, I'm just going to use these 4 pieces. All right, so now I'm going to take these over to the iron and I'm going to iron each piece. So now they're not so big. They're not 2 yards of fabric. It's just a 14-inch piece. So I'm going to be able to iron it out perfectly. And I want to do this because you can tell on this one, see, I don't have these perfectly lined up. And when I go to cut the placemats or to cut the coasters, this is what I'm talking about, why you should do 14-inch napkins and 5-inch coasters, because you don't necessarily always get the perfect 15 and 5-inch cut. You don't perfectly always get the 20 inches that you need from each fabric. But by ironing it and getting out this seam right here so that you can orient it in a different way when you go about cutting it, really helps. So I'm going to take all of these over to the iron, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to finish cutting these. All right, now that I've got all these ironed, the next step is to cut them into the placemat sizes, the coaster sizes, and the napkin sizes. So since I want 6 placemats, I'm going to need 3 blues, and I'm going to need 3 bunnies to make 6 placemats. So these pieces here will end up getting cut into 14 by 20-inch pieces, and then these pieces here will get cut into 14 and then 5 by 5-inch pieces. So they'll be, when you see, it's folded in half here. So when you cut it into 14, there'll be 2 pieces right here, and then we'll have 4 pieces over here. So it'll be 2 napkins and 2 coasters, because the coasters are 2-sided. So that is what I'm going to do. All right, so now we've got our placemats cut. Time to cut napkins and coasters. So I know this ruler is 5 inches, so something I can do to test is put the fabric over here. So I've got 14 inches. So for this one, I could get away with 15-inch by 15-inch napkins and 5 by 5-inch coasters, but just to keep everything even, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do 14 and play it safe. Just cut the coaster out first because it's the width of this ruler. Just want to make sure that they're lined up well. And I'm matching it up to these black lines. So if I have it matched up on the sides and 2 of the black lines, then I know it's a square. So that's one coaster. to, and then scrap. And then I've got the napkin. So I want to cut the napkin from the opening in, because then that gives me the biggest amount of piece left over to do something else with. So that's the piece I have. Now I've got 2 napkins, 2 coasters. Alrighty, so okay, so it's really bothering me that I have 6 placemats and then 4 napkins and 4 coasters. So I'm gonna make it an even 6. And since this piece is 14 by 14, but this piece is only 13, sorry, this isn't 14 by 14. This is 14 tall, this is 13 tall. I'm going to do 2 more coasters out of the bunny, and I'm going to do 2 more napkins out of the flowers. And that'll leave me a piece to be able to do another project with. There's this bag I want to make, and then I'll still be able to make a complete 6 set. So I'm going to get these 2 chopped up, add it to the pile, and then we will start assembling and then sew. Then 13 by almost 32. So 2 pretty good pieces left over, and I was able to get 6 coasters and 6 napkins. All right, so I'm gonna go grab the interfacing and then we can start doing our piling. All right, so I already have my interfacing pre-cut. What I'm using here is some Pellon quilting interfacing fleece, sew-in, TP 970. This is usually $7.99 a yard, and I bought the whole bolt. So let me get back to you with some math here, 1 second. All right, I've got that math for you. So it's $7.99 a yard, and there's 15 yards worth. That means if you bought this whole bolt, it would be $119.85. But I bought the whole bolt, and I actually had a 60% off coupon. So with a 60% off coupon, $119, ends up being $47.94. If you're not able to get a 60% off coupon, you can only find a 50% off coupon, then that would be $59.93. I would highly suggest searching for a 50 or 60% off coupon, or if the interfacing is on sale 50% off, to go ahead and buy a whole bolt. The reason, or the way I knew it was a whole bolt, when I bought it at the store, it had plastic wrap around it still, and I just took the whole thing to the register, and they just rung me up for 15 yards worth and then used the coupon. It was kind of hard to have such a big, I cut this in half, but it was a whole bolt. It was very bulky. If you don't have the space to store that, you could always just cut it up right away into the projects you're going to be using. But it definitely saves a lot of time as to not having to go to the store each time you need a project. Or if you go to the store and you buy the wrong amount of interfacing, or it's cut at an angle, if it's sew-in interfacing, then you can't use it. You can't piece two pieces together. It just doesn't work nicely, because then you always have a seam. So just my tips and tricks: buy a whole bolt and buy it on sale, and then you're good to go for a long time. My bolt lasted me about 6 months. So I'm due for a new bolt now, but I do have a whole basket worth of random interfacings. I like buying my fabrics at thrift stores, and I've gotten random interfacings through that. So I want to use that up first before I get another bolt. But it has been very wonderful being able to have a bolt at home. Anyways, on to our fabrics. I forgot to grab pins, so one moment. I've got my pins now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make our piles so we can go ahead and get sewing. So I'm gonna start off with the placemats. So what we'll need is one blue and one bunny, because that's what's gonna be on each side. Just gonna set the rest of these on the floor right here beside me. I vacuum my carpet a million times a day, so there's no need to worry. All right, so we're gonna take our two fabrics and we're gonna place one face down on the other. It doesn't really matter if it's directional, because the fabric's already cut in a directional way. So we're gonna lay these on top of each other, right sides facing. That means the pretty sides of the fabric are touching each other. And we're gonna try and get it evened up as much as possible. Now it doesn't really matter, the next step is put the interfacing on top. It doesn't really matter which side you put it on, just as long as it's consistent throughout. So I'm gonna go ahead, place this down. So since this is sew-in interfacing instead of iron-on, I don't need to iron it down. However, that means that all of my interfacing needs to touch all my corners. If it doesn't, that means that the thread is not going to get caught into it, and it's going to slip, and it's not going to stay nice and flat. That's the only downside to working with sew-in interfacing. So I'm going to flip it over. It's kind of like the static is holding it steady. And so this is the side that I'm going to sew on. I find it easier to sew on the fabric rather than on the interfacing when you get to the sewing machine, because if you sew it on this side, the fabric, or the interfacing tends to get stretched and get all wonky and move to the side. So I definitely like sewing on the top. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to place my needles vertically. I'm going to do 3 on each. These needles are actually listed online as boutonniere needles. I don't know, I don't like when crafting things are a million different colors, and most of the time when you get sewing needles, they're like blue and green and yellow and orange, and I can't stand that. I like things being one color and it looking nice, so I actually prefer these because it's all white, it's all one color. It's just my OCD. All right, so when we take this to the sewing machine, we're gonna sew all 3 of these layers together, and we're gonna leave a 2 or 3 inch gap. So start sewing here, go around, keep going, and then stop right here. And then this opening will allow us to turn it inside out. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin the rest of the placemats, and then I'll get back to you. All right, so now it's time to do the coasters. The good part is that it's the same concept as the placemats. It's just a smaller scale. So I'm going to remove the napkins here because those just need to be ironed around the edges, and that's what will form the napkin sides. All right, so you could take one panel of each, just like with the placemats, and stack them on top of each other so that you'd end up with reversible coasters. However, I like just keeping the same pattern together. It seems to give a better result at the end. Just because it's such a small project, if you make any errors in lining them up or doing a straight edge, it just seems to hide the imperfections. This one being directional, I want to make sure that the bunnies are both facing the same way. You don't want it like upside down because it wouldn't look as nice when you flip the coaster over. So I just try and make sure that if it is directional, that they're facing the same way when you stack them right sides together. What you could do when you're cutting your fabric is you could flip it so that the right sides are touching each other so that you wouldn't have to do this step. It would already be facing the right way, but it's not a big deal. All right, and then just like with the placemats, they need the piece of interfacing, and again, doesn't matter what side it goes on, it's all the same. So I just have my pieces here. I'm gonna stick on top. All right, and then I'm gonna flip these guys over and stick some pins in. For these, I generally do one pin like that and one pin like this, so that when I'm sewing around, I don't necessarily have to move the pins. I can just leave them in the whole time. It makes it a little easier, makes it go a little faster. But if you wanted to do 1, 2, 3, 4 pins, or 6 or 8, whatever makes you happy. I am good at doing it with 2, so that's what I do. It's very sweet of her. Alrighty, so now all of the coasters are pinned together, all of the placemats are pinned together. The napkins don't get pinned. What you do with the napkins is take this to the iron, and on the wrong side, just go on each edge, fold it in 1/4 of an inch, iron, and then fold it again. And that encloses the raw seam. If you wanted to, you could pink this and then just fold over once, or serge it and fold it over once, or there's a way that you can miter the corners and then it folds in. I can show you an example of that. So the example that I'm saying of folding it over 1/4 of an inch each time leads to a result like this, which I think looks really nice. This is what a mitered cornered edge would look like. It's a lot less bulky in the corner, which is a pro, but I just don't prefer how wide this is because you end up using a 1/2 inch to fold and then 1/4. So you use almost an inch when you fold in. So you also lose some of your napkin size. So I like doing this one. I think it looks very clean. I can do it very consistently. So I prefer doing 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. So it's only a 1/2 inch on each side. All right, so I'm gonna go over to the iron and iron the sides of these, and I'll show you what I mean by the 1/4 of an inch on the first one, and then I'll speed it up. All right, so I've got my iron on, set on cotton, filled with water, with the steam ready to go. So as I'm working on this, you could just eyeball it and do a 1/4 of an inch, then a 1/4 of an inch, or if you want to do a different amount, that's up to you. I'm a big fan of using tools to make my work look more consistent. I really prefer when things look as perfect as possible and not homemade. So I have this Dritz Easy Hem, and it has all these different measurements. I believe this was about $14 at Joann's, but like with anything, use a 60% off coupon. And sometimes if you're nice to them, they will let you do 2 different transactions at one time. So that's how you can use a 50% off coupon twice, like getting your inner facing and this guy in one trip. Or take a friend with you, give them some cash, and then you can have 2 transactions. So I have a 1/4 of an inch on this side here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold it over a 1/4 of an inch, iron, and then go around. All lined up, and because this is metal, this tool, it won't get hurt by the iron, because I've seen where people will do a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard and write their notches and their measurements to make one. I tried that. I don't know if it was the paper I was using or what, but it just wasn't working well for me, so that's why I just broke down and got this guy. And this has worked fantastic. I've made probably well over 100 napkins with this. So I just use it, first go around, I get my seam all nice. So now I know that this is a 1/4 of an inch down. So I do 3 passes on each side. So now I know this is a 1/4 of an inch. So then I go, you can hear the steam. I go along the edge, and you notice here I have my fabric at like an angle. I do that to try and make it so I don't have to do 2 passes. So now that's a 1/4 of an inch. And then because this bulk is already here, when I go and, set this to the side, then I go and fold it over like this, then it, I can feel where the edge is. It goes right here. So then I'm gonna just do it by hand the second time. I could use the device again to help me get perfect 1/4 of an inch each time, but I found that I'm consistent enough on the second run that I'm okay with only using it on the first. Plus it is quite time consuming that it's only the short edge that has a 1/4 inch. I wish this edge had a 1/4 inch, because then I could do it just 2, but I am happy with the tool that I have. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the next side. And there we go. So with the second fold eyeballed and the first one measured, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do the other 3 sides, and then when we get to the 4th side, I'm gonna show you how I make it so that it's continuous and that each edge is folded in itself. So I'm gonna turn it clockwise. Sorry. All right, turn it clockwise and leave this edge down. I'm gonna do a 1/4 of an inch, and I'm gonna do the same thing. All right, so I'm gonna speed this up and I'll be back with you on the last corner. All right, so now I'm on that last corner. So if I just continued with what I was doing and I let this top edge be down and folded it and then folded it again, it would be complete. It would be done. It would be a napkin. It would work great. However, see how this is down, this is down. but then these two are going in a circle. If you just take the extra second, open this up here, and then do quarter, and then quarter, and so do the 2 quarters right here, and then use what's already sewn or already ironed down. Then every edge will be continuous, and they'll have no clue where you started and ended. So just little things like that I like doing, because it just makes your work look more complete. It makes it not look handmade. It makes it look like it was made professionally and made in a store. And I just like that. I like being as professional as possible. So that is what I'm gonna do. All right, so I did this last corner. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold back the first corner that I did. If you have any strings, just go ahead and cut those guys. Sometimes you have some stragglers. So then I'm gonna fold it once, fold it twice. This is the corner we started off on, remember? So now I'm just gonna iron that one more time. You could pin these guys down if you want to, but generally I just go ahead and sew it, so there's no need. But now the folds are continuous, and it's gonna look really nice as an end product. I'm gonna go ahead and iron these other 5 napkins. All right, so I've got my placemats stacked together, coasters stacked together, and then napkins folded and ironed. So now it's time to pick a thread. I have big black and white threads, so I generally try and use those first. For the placemats and the coasters, the inside basting stitch, if you will, you're not going to see it. If it's too loose, you might see it on the edges, but generally you don't see it at all. So I don't feel a need to use my smaller navy thread for the inside if I could just use black or white instead. Since these are our 2 colors, the navy and then the white, I'm going to do white. So I am going to try and kill as many birds with one stone as I can. So I'm going to do this whole stack, the basting stitch and the coasters in white. And then I'm going to go ahead and take care of these 2 napkins. Then I'm going to turn everything inside out and use the navy stitching on these napkins. So I will be switching the thread out, but for the majority of the project, I'm going to use white thread so that I don't burn through my thread as fast. So let's go over to the sewing machine. So I'm going to go ahead and thread up my white thread. When using these big spools, you'll want to get one of these thread holder things. I don't remember what it's called. I'll link it down below. And it just helps guide the thread so it doesn't get twisted, because these spools aren't going to fit on your sewing machine. It just doesn't work. So I have one on my device, and then the other one I just have in this coffee cup that my brother got me for Christmas. Yeah, he's so funny. And so when I'm using the black one, sometimes I'll swap it, or I'll just leave it in the cup and I'll hook it up here and then thread it into my machine. The idea is to just give the thread some time before it gets to the machine. So I have it hooked up here like normal, and then I'm going to go ahead and thread. But when using the black one, if it's in the cup, it'll bang on the cup and make noise because it's spooling out the thread, but it won't hurt anything. It's totally fine. So if you wanted it to be quieter, then you could put it on the spool holder, but I don't really care. So I've got my white threaded. Check my bobbin. Don't have that much, but it's white, so I'm all good with that. I'm lucky my machine has a self cutter, and like, it's very fancy. I very much enjoy it. I have a Brother SE600. It also does embroidery, so I'll make some more videos on that as well. It's a really fun toy to play with. So now I've got my threads all pulled through. So I'll either pull the bobbin up, like how I just did by putting the needle down, or I will use a little piece here as a guide or starter piece. Generally I do this just to make sure it gives you a better first stitch on your project, because then the bobbin and the top thread are pulled and it just looks nice. So for the settings here for the placemats and the coasters, I sew at a 1/2 inch opening. So I just go ahead and leave, I leave all the settings normal. I don't mess with anything for this. I just have my width at 3.5, length at 2.5, and I don't shift it left and right. And this allows me to just use my presser foot as the guide when I'm sewing. So if you remember, I said leave an opening, but then sew all the way around. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to leave it open right here, but I'm going to I'm going to start sewing right here. All right. And I always follow my fabric and not the interfacing, because like I said, sometimes the interfacing stretches and it's not the true size. So I always base my sewing off of the fabric, because it's more likely I cut that properly. And sometimes it doesn't match up 100%, but that's okay. So I'm going to sew at a 1/2 inch. So that means I'm going to have my presser foot up against the edge here and this centered. And that's what I'm going to do. All right. Back stitch at the front and end. So when I get close to the edge here, sometimes if you might need another stitch or so, I'm going to just go ahead and pivot by leaving the needle in. You could tell I needed another stitch. So I'm just going to do 1 stitch, test it. If you go over a stitch, don't stress it. So look, if I go 1, 2, and it's too much, whatever. Go back to how it was, do a back stitch, and then flip it. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't stab yourself like I just did though. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the other 3 sides. Don't forget to take your pins out. Do not sew over your pins. I have this little trinket dish here to catch my pins. I just think it's cute. Makes me happy. All right, keep going. When I am sewing the opposite side of one that I just did, sorry, the camera's not staying. All right, when I sew, so I've already sewn this side. See, there's stitches. So I want to keep it tight and taut and be straight. So I'll hold this side as it's going through so that I can try and keep things as even as possible. And most of the time I'll just have it folded up here while I'm going about. So when you have the opposite side like this, it's really far to be able to hold it because it's 20 inches long. So tip for you here, fold it in thirds, and then look, I can hold it nicely like this. All right, and then I want to back stitch. Okay, so I could cut the thread here. I have automatic thread cutter, but like we did, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Anyways, but I will just cut this guy off and reuse him. I just have a little basket over here that I have a bunch of little pieces like this that I use for my starter pieces. I don't know why I can't think of the name for it. And so I'll just sew that over a million times and then throw it in the trash after. Okay, so you could inspect after doing each one, or you could check at the end, but with the sew-in interfacing rather than the iron-on, it needs to have caught all the edges. So flip your guy over and check. Check your sides, check along the edge. Did you catch it? If you caught it, then we're good. Go to the next one. So you can either check that as you go, or you could check it at the end. And again, just to keep things a little neater, I just fold it in thirds, set it aside. All right, I'm gonna go do the rest of the placemats, and then I will be back. All right, let's get started on the coasters. So I'm gonna clear out my little bowl here so I have plenty of space. All right, and And then the coasters are the same concept as the placemats. So you leave an opening about an inch or two. So you start down here and just go around. If you have a directional print, like the bunnies, so here they are facing upright, I would do it either on the side or on the bottom. I wouldn't do it on the top. But it's just a little coaster, so it's not a big deal anyways. Just a tip. All right. Same settings as the placemats. Alright, see we have our opening right here. The rest is sealed, just like with the other one. Flip it around, check. So see this right here, that's why I normally chain thread or do a lead piece, so that doesn't happen. But this is the inside of the coaster and no one's ever going to see it, so pick your battles. Again, with the bunnies, I'm going to do the opening at the bottom or the side. And like I said before, by putting the pins in this formation, if you noticed when I was sewing around, I was never hitting it, or if I did come close, I could just scooch it over, and it was all good. So that's my tip for doing these. If you only did one in the center, sometimes the basting tends to move a little, so 2 is definitely needed. Oh, and I just said like 4 times not to do it at the top, but whatever. Something I could do to fix that is I could do this. All right, so as of right now, I have back stitches here and here. So what I could do is just fake that the bottom is my opening. So this is my old stitches, remember? So I'm just gonna go back over it. Boom. Like it never happened. So if someone looked at the inside, they would see that it's a little crazy up here, that there's a lot of stitches, but now my opening's at the bottom. So not a big deal. So if you didn't go to the edge and then lift up the foot and pivot, you would end up with like a curve. So that's why you want to make sure that you leave the needle in, lift, and pivot. Because having very straight corners definitely makes a much better end product. And also having your openings be the same seam allowance is important too, because then when you turn it inside out, you don't want the part that you need to close up to be like at a downwards angle. So this one, I definitely am probably going to end up having to cut out a couple seams because it's too tight, but we'll see. All right, so now the placemats and the coasters have been basted. If someone knows what the right word is, I know the word's not basting, but whatever this initial sewing is actually called, please let me know. All right, so now on to the napkins. All right, so let's work on these napkins. We've already got them folded. So like I said, I like to try and make things look as professional as possible, and I know using my gauge that everything is 1/4 of an inch. So I like to sew my top stitch down. We're trying to make this piece stay down. So I like to sew on top because it just comes out cleaner. You could sew on the bottom if you wanted to, but then think about that your top thread is going to be here and your bobbin's going to be here. So that is why I prefer to sew this way around. And because we ironed clockwise this way, when we're sewing clockwise, it's actually the opposite because it's on top. So I am going to change my machine right here, the left-right shift. I change it 2 millimeters. So now I can use the edge of my presser foot. So since you will see this top stitch, I am definitely going to use a lead piece, which just got a ton of crap on it. Hold on. I want my top stitch to look nice. All right. So either pull your bobbin and your top thread out and hold it, or get a little piece of fabric to do it for you. So since it's folded down like this, we're not going to get caught up on the lip. And I'm just going to load this guy. So since this is directional, I want to start on the bottom because we are going to have a back stitch. So we want that to be as little noticeable as possible. So I'm just going to load this in here. I'm pretty centered into the back corner there. All right, and then I'm going to do a couple stitches forward, a couple stitches backwards, and I know that I'm catching this. So what I'm doing is I'm going to hold my hand. See how this is want to come up? I'm going to hold my hand down here. So I am holding the roll down, and with my other hand I'm going to guide it. I also go like this, and I can feel the lump of where the fold is. So when you get closer, make sure this is folded in nicely. All right, so now I'm going to hold this piece down because I want to make sure that I can get over this lip. So I can feel in my machine that it's through multiple pieces of fabric. And now I'm going to spin it around, leaving the needle in. You see, it's still on the edge. See how nicely this caught? All right, so sometimes if you're a little too far back, you might have to use something like a pair of scissors or an awl or pen or something to push your fabric through. But generally doing it in this fashion, that doesn't happen. now that we're on the last corner, because our first corner is down, remember when I showed you when ironing that you make every corner go into the next corner? Look how nice that's gonna be. Look, it's already holding itself in when you do the last corner here. So I'm not really even holding anything because the force of this stitch right here is already holding the fabric in place. If you were adding a tag, I would do it right now. This is the end right here. I would just stick the tag in right here. All right, now we're getting close to the end. I'm gonna go ahead and trim these threads. Try and make it look as nice as possible. I like to make sure they overlap a little. And backstitch. So since I've already done one napkin, I don't need to use my leader piece again. What I can do now, instead of cutting my thread, is just raise my needle and pull this to the side. And now this is my lead piece. But just, all right, so I'm gonna put my napkins aside here. On the coasters and on the placemats, we need to trim around the edges. So as you can see here, the thread goes all the way around. So what we need to do is trim the corners. And make sure you don't cut your thread. And we're going to trim the sides. All right, but don't trim the side that has the opening. I mean, you can trim this portion over here. So you could go like that if you want to, but I don't bother. It's not worth it. So just leave the side with the opening the way it is. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of the coasters and the placemats, and I'll be back. Please click on part 2 to continue watching this tutorial.